Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Journey Running Podcast, where the goal is to help you run farther, fuel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. I am your host, registered dietitian, running coach, and ultra runner Stefan Schuster. Welcome to the show today. We've got a great one. A few episodes ago, I recorded a podcast about my training and preparation for the Western States 100. So today I'm finally sitting down, but I'm standing up at my standing desk to record the recap episode of how the race went. So very excited for this one. I think this is going to be an epic episode for anybody who is training for the Western States 100 or who is looking for more recon on the course. Once again, like I said, I recorded a whole episode on training and preparation for the race. So if you're looking for tips and tricks to prepare yourself for the Western States 100, I would definitely recommend checking that episode out. Today's episode is going to be more of an actual recap of my experience on the course and just everything that happened while I was out there. Before we get into it though, per usual, this is a great time to remind everybody I am a registered dietitian, I am a running coach, I am an ultra runner, but this Journey Running, it is a podcast, but it is also my business. I offer a variety of both nutrition and running coaching services, so please check out my website, Journey Run Coaching, to learn more about myself and my business and hopefully support me however you would like. There's also a variety of downloads on the website. There's a free calendar. I got to put the 2026 one up because 2025 is coming to an end. But there's a free calendar you can download to, plan your training on your computer or print it out and do it on your own. There's also a few, training plans and guides and stuff on the website you can use. And that reminds me, I just added a blog to the website per my last episode, which was a recap on my experience both crewing and pacing the Badwater 135 this year. In that episode, I had mentioned at the beginning that I'd be putting up a blog post about the experience with a whole bunch of tips and tricks for that event. I think that the blog post I wrote is very thorough. It was like 12 Word document pages. So if you're looking if you know anyone or if yourself or if you're planning to run the Badwater 135, that's a super in-depth and useful guide for yourself as well. So that's just on the blog page on my website. You'll see it on the top navigation bar there. I think that's everything I got. Anybody is looking to reach out for coaching services, like I said, you can check out the website. I'll say it again, journeyruncoaching.com. You can also email me directly at journeyrunningllc@gmail.com for any questions, thoughts, concerns on the podcast. Hopefully no concerns, but yeah, would love to hear from you. All right, without further ado, let's get into an awesome and very thorough recap of the Western States 100. I am going to put up a whole blog post on what my experience was at Western States. I wrote a really thorough not review because I wasn't really reviewing the race, but just a recap of everything that happened out there. It was really important to me this year to make sure that I was doing a good job recording everything that happened at Western States, at Badwater, and then also running the Leadville 100 this year too. It was really important for me to do that because I've been wanting to race Western States in particular since I was like 14 years old. So I'm 30 now, 16-year dream. It's really important to me that, I have a really authentic and what's the word I'm looking for? Accurate recap of everything that happened out there. So I wrote just a ton and I'm going to put it all up in the blog. And, today I'll be reading from some of my thoughts, some of my notes that I had written down about the race. But this is the audio format, I guess you could call it. But yeah, let's just jump right on into it just for a little bit of background. I went to Western States. Western was my 13th 100 miler, lucky number 13. I got in off of 5 lottery tickets, which was super lucky. I think I had I got in with 16 lottery tickets, year 5, and it was a website said I had like a 5% chance to get in or 6% chance. So got super lucky. I went out there with a crew of my mom, my dad. It was their first time crewing me at a race. And then my good friend, Joel Gartenberg, who has been a guest on the Journey Running podcast. I think he was like the first guest I had on. The episode was titled something like run your next ultra in Crocs with Joel Gartenberg, something like that. Cause he used to run ultras in Crocs. So that was really cool. He actually ran Ultra Running Weirdo of the Year as a side note for running Javelina 100 as a pirate in Crocs as Captain Croc. Anyways, he was my pacer. I wanted him out there as my pacer because I wanted somebody who I knew could both run fast but also be there as he's a strong athlete. And I think that when you're running a race like Western where a really big theme of the race that I'm going to talk about is just how much pressure it kind of feels like is there. Everything from like the race day check-in to, that first climb. People are pretty quiet on the course. It feels like, because everyone's in their own head, I think, wanting to take advantage of, seize the moment per se, and make the most out of like all the years and training and hard work that they put into getting into Western States. And so, when you're planning to have a pacer out there, I wanted someone like Joel who I knew would be able to bring the fun, but also who is a really strong runner and who knows how to motivate other people really well. So a really good tip just when you're looking for a pacer for an important race like this. But yeah, like I was saying, the expo was really cool for Western States. It's pretty hectic compared to any other trail races that I have been to. There's just a lot going on over there. Everywhere you look, there's a famous runner, or everywhere you look, there's just like famous people. I got like pictures with Gordy Ainsley, with AJW. Who else did I see the day? Oh, I saw String Bean. I got a photo with him. Killian Jornet signed my book. How could I forget that? I brought Run or Die to the expo just in case I saw him with a marker, because I wanted to get his autograph, and was lucky enough for him to walk by and get that. So that was super cool. But yeah, there's just a lot going on. There's they have like this really organized check-in process, and it's just there's a lot going on, and it can feel a bit overwhelming, especially when you consider a lot of us ultra runners can be more introverted. And then there's of course like the mandatory the mandatory runner meeting that they have everyone attend, and like those spots it's outside and it fills up quickly and it's kind of hot and you're sitting down or standing up and you're wondering to yourself, I'm getting sunburned the day before the race, this isn't good. So yeah, there's just a lot of thoughts in your head, making last minute changes to your drop bags, whatever else you got going on. Hopefully you got most of that organized before the race though. And then, let's just like get right into race morning. So I got to the start line like 20 minutes before the gun went off. I thought that I would not be like the first person there, but I could have lined up as M1, I guess, if I wanted to on the line. I was not going to do that. I'm not going to start in front of Killian and David Roach and all those folks. But yeah, I was surprised that it doesn't really fill up until more like the last second. There's a variety. There's like a little indoor bathroom area I think a lot of people were huddled in. Everyone thinks of Western States as really hot race, but it is actually fairly cold when you start closer to Tahoe in the mountains over there at the ski resort in Olympic Valley. So I think it was like 40s, or it was about like somewhere in the 40s-ish that morning, I think, if I remember correctly. So yeah, it is a little bit chilly at the start. I started the race with a vest on and a waist belt. I thought that it would be good to start with the ability to carry a little bit more gear and items, because the first few aid stations are spread a little bit further apart compared to the rest of the course. Like the first aid station isn't until mile 10, and then it's like mile 16, and then like 24.4, and then 31. So the first 50K, the aid stations are spread a little further apart, which is why I wanted a pack to just carry a little bit more stuff with me. But like, the race has 20 or 21 aid stations throughout it. So on average, like, you're seeing an aid station every few miles after that, once you start going into like the canyons and then in the latter part of the course. There's an aid station like every 3 to 6 miles or something. So there's a lot of support out there, especially in the second half. But I think it's noteworthy because to mention this stuff, because if you're planning to race Western States and you're wondering like, should I start with a waist belt or a pack, which was something that I was debating leading up to the event. I started with a pack and then I switched to a waist belt in the canyons and ran light, which was really nice through the hottest part of the course because there's so many aid stations out there. And then I actually put a pack back on at Forest Hill for the remainder of the race. So that's how I did it. You can do it however you want. I think switching back and forth was kind of nice because I also had my crew prepare a variety of, or I just told them what I wanted. And, that way, whenever, like when I got to Forest Hill, for example, I just took off my waist belt and my pack was already packed with bottles already filled, how I had asked my crew to do it. So I think that when you do stuff like that, it can go back and forth. It can really help with your transition times in an event that you want to make sure you're not spending too much time at aid stations at. Anyways, let's actually get into the race now. So as probably everybody listening to this knows that the race does start going up, 2,500 feet-ish. So you start with a pretty steep climb going up Emigrant Pass in Olympic Valley there. I'm going to be honest, if you've run other events like the Bighorn 100 or I guess Bighorn, you're kind of like running on single track and some flat ground before you really start climbing. Same with like the Bear 100, but I'm thinking of like those climbs at the beginning, the Bear, and Bighorn and Cascade Crest and Mogollon Monster. The climb at Western States up Emigrant it's not particularly like more difficult than any of those others. I would say it's about the same and maybe even a little bit easier. There's parts of the climb that are pretty steep that like I hiked. I know the front runners are running everything, but I hiked some of the steeper stuff. Most of that first climb though is fairly like runnable. I mean, I averaged 15-minute miles up the first like 4.5 miles up to the top there. Just I think that's a good way to describe it. I think at the start, let's see, it also like is a good opportunity for it to thin out. I think that something that's noteworthy is that like it's a really humbling way to start a really important race. Like a lot of people, it felt very quiet at the not at the start line, but like once the race got going, because I think everyone's in their head trying to make the most of their one opportunity for many of us to run Western States. And so it's a little bit quieter. It felt like everyone's in their head thinking about like making the most of the opportunity, stuff like that. So it was just a little bit different in that sense, but it's also good for, the runners to thin out a little bit more because, once you pass the escarpment, I mean, you really get into Granite Chief Wilderness, the trail becomes single track and it becomes a bit harder to pass people. So yeah, it was a really cool experience, especially when you go up the escarpment, because you're going up, there's like a chairlift that can bring runners up. I think it was Hoka who sponsored, so shout out to Hoka. They sponsored everybody's like gondola ticket that morning. So if you wanted to go up top and cheer on runners at the escarpment, you could do so if you're a spectator. Man, that environment was pretty sick. I put up a YouTube video that was, a YouTube video of my Western States experience. So if you check that out, one of my friends got a pretty good video of me going through the whole conga line of spectators there who were giving out high fives and donuts and cheering people on with vuvuzelas. And, it was crazy. It was the coolest little section of trail running I have ever seen in the U.S. Not that I've run outside of the U.S. Of this recording, but it was really cool. It was great to see my pacer drill out there. And, you get that beautiful view, that famous view of Lake Tahoe at the top of the escarpment. And the saying is, that like everyone's got to take one last look at the lake before you enter the Granite Chief Wilderness and you really start. Yeah, and the race really starts after that because it's not like most of us are running up the first climb. But yeah, that was pretty sweet. Yeah, after running over through the escarpment and going into Granite Chief, the trail, I have to say, it was far more technical than I had expected. I know that everybody talks about like Western States being and just California single track being so smooth and rolling and downhill. And just don't let people fool you because the Granite Chief Wilderness is rocky and loose. There's a lot of tree roots. There was a ton of water. There's really no way that you're getting through there. There were like a whole bunch of points on the trail there where like it was impossible to not get your feet wet. So, I mean, it was just a much more technical section than I had anticipated. And because of that, myself and I think everyone around me, we were just going a little bit slower, maybe than we expected, maybe not. At least for what I expected, I thought we were a little slower. And that goes on so the top of the escarpment's mile about like 4.5, and then that goes on till about like mile 8 or so. So, the first 8 miles of the race are pretty much like the slowest part of the race outside of like, when you're going through the canyons. But it's good because you got a lot of pent up energy at a race like Western in that environment. And it's good to, make sure that that's tamed early on and, you can still start off well. Like I said, I was doing like 15-minute miles going up the escarpment, 2,500 feet on the first climb. If you're running 15-minute miles, that's like 4 miles an hour. That's like just under, I think, 24-hour pace. So, it's not too bad. You're going to make that up in other parts of the course. Yeah. So let's see. So after like mile 8.5-ish, the trail really did start to like smooth out. It wasn't like as wet or loose or rocky or anything like that. And there was also like a lot more space at that point to start passing runners or be passed, I guess, in that case. But yeah, that's really when the typical leapfrog of trail running started. I rolled into the first aid station, Lion Ridge, at mile 10.3 in 2 hours and 12 minutes. I'll say that if you are interested in running Western States in sub 24, you can look up my splits on, opensplit.com or something, but otherwise I'll say them here and you can use them as a reference because I ended up finishing in 23 hours and 17 minutes. Spoiler alert, but I'll bring that up just because somebody listening to this who has aspirations of running sub 24 at Western States and getting a silver belt buckle, which is a sub 24 hour finish. You get a bronze one if you finish in the 24 to 30 hour range. You might be interested in the statistics just for your own planning. But yeah, so I came through Lion Ridge, mile 10.3 in 2 hours, 12 minutes. I was, I think like 10 or 15 minutes off of my personal prediction for that section, but I think I was, I was like 2 minutes off of the Western States website. They have a recommended 24-hour pace, so I think I was only like 2 minutes off of their recommended pace when I got into that aid station. So started off pretty much like where I needed to be. If there's one place in the race at Western where you want to be a little bit slower, the first 10 miles is probably a good place for that to be. Yeah, I'll also say that my nutrition plan for Western States, I think I talked about this in my training and preparation episode, but my nutrition plan was essentially to, Western States is a hot race, and you got to make sure that you have a plan to be able to eat to get calories down efficiently when it is super hot out. So I actually copied my pacers, So my friend Joel and I, we ran the Bear 100 as, quick side note, we ran the Bear 100 as Mario and Luigi in September 2024. And he was using maple syrup to fuel, and it was the first time I'd seen someone do that, and I thought it was a really interesting idea and just alternative to gels, which are super expensive. So I was like, and it's natural. So I was like, I'm just going to copy him and try this out. So I actually ended up fueling most of my Western States race with maple syrup. And I just got some 250 milliliter soft flasks from Hydropack Hydroflat, blanking on the brand. Anyways, I got 250 milliliter nutrition flasks from them, and that's what I used to carry it, and I just put that in my waist belt. I also had a Cliff Bar with me that morning and some scratch gummies, and then basically all the aid stations all day. The only things I was taking from there was like watermelon, potato chips for a little sodium, and potato chips, and what was the other thing? M&Ms. I'm big on those. Are like my big three at races for me personally. They're pretty easy on the stomach, especially like liquid calories, like the maple syrup, super dense calories, all sugar essentially, and it worked for me. Another spoiler alert, I had zero GI issues at Western States the entire race. And how could I forget? I also used Tailwind for a lot of my calories throughout the race as well. I had one bottle as water with me at all times on the course, and then I had another that was a mix of water and Tailwind. I used their double serving packets, which they sell on their website. So their double serving packets have 200 calories and 630 milligrams of sodium. If you do the math, if you have like 10 of those, 15 of those over the course of a race, that's a fuck ton of sodium. Let's just be real. Most people don't want to go to their doctor and be like, I just had 8,000 milligrams of sodium today. That doesn't sound healthy. But, I took a sweat test in, March or April? Because I really wanted to get my electrolytes dialed in for the race. And I actually realized for a lot of my ultra running career, I was a little bit low on sodium intake. So this year I was upping that quite significantly compared to what I had done in the past, and it worked really well. I would say that if you are listening to this, don't copy me. I would actually just recommend, so most people are sweating out, like losing sweat concentration wise of sodium, 500, 800 milligrams. So, you could copy me and it might work really well. But what I mean is don't copy me in the sense that like all of us have a genetic we all genetically have a different concentration of sodium in our sweat, and you can get that tested. Most people are in that 500 to 800 range, but some people are over 1,000, right? So if you copy me, you might be still way too low. My number of sweat concentration was 820 milligrams, and this is per liter, also important. So my goal was to get about 700 milligrams of sodium per liter because you do reabsorb some of the sodium from your sweat, right? Your sweat losses, right? And actually, the more time you go to a sauna and work on heat exposure and heat training, the more efficient and effective your body is at reabsorbing sodium from your sweat. So you reabsorb about 5 to 10% for reference. So, if you do the math, that comes out to roughly needing 700 milligrams per liter of fluid that you're intaking because of what you're losing. Hopefully everyone's following this. Anyways, that worked for me. I used the double the Tailwind double serving sizes. So 630 plus some potato chips and like Cliff Bars and stuff like that at 8 stations and whatnot. I figured that came out to about 700 milligrams, and that worked really, really well for me. So that was my nutrition plan throughout the day. I really relied on like probably 95% of my calories at the race came from just Tailwind and maple syrup. And I think that's important to note just because that also really helped me get through aid stations like very quickly and efficiently, especially when I had everything on me that I needed. But yeah. So after the first section up to Lion Ridge, so let's see, the trek to Red Star Ridge, let's start talking about that. Oh wait, actually there's one more thing I want to bring up about the Lion Ridge aid station and just Western states in general. So Western states in general, they do a really, really good job with their aid station efficiency. Their goal is to get you in and out as quickly as friggin' possible. This is not like other events. Like I've ran like the San Diego 100 where, the first aid station was a tiki bar and it was so much fun. That was epic. I freaking loved it, right? But this is not like that. The second that you get into an aid station at Western States, the volunteers, they must be trained to get you in and out as quickly as possible because the second you roll in, they're like, what do you need? Here it is. Get the fuck out of here. Like run your race, take advantage of the moment. You've worked hard to be here and so on. So like they just want you in and out as quickly as possible. And I think that that's super important, especially if you're planning to be here at this race. All right, let's move on. So the trek to Red Star Ridge, which is at mile 15.8. I thought it was a lot of fun. Hiked the Tahoe Rim Trail. So this section really brought me back to my time on the trail there because there's all these really tall trees. And if you've ever been out there in Tahoe, there's like this moss that's like neon green on the trees. And it's just so freaking cool to look at. You have to see it. The way it contrasts with the bark of the trees and like the trail and like the blue skies that are out there. It's just like the colors are just, it's just a big dopamine hit of colors. It's really cool. You got to see it. But yeah, this section reminded me a lot of my time on the Tahoe Rim Trail. It also reminded me a lot of my time on the Pacific Crest Trail section of the Cascade Crest 100, where, you're overlooking all these mountains that are covered in trees. This is not like, for the most part, Colorado mountains where there's like wild, jagged peaks everywhere in the distance, right? This isn't hard rock, but like there's just layers of mountains, covered in pine trees going on for miles and miles and miles, and it's just really cool. Oh, and the pine cones out there are just like football sized. Side note, from the Tahoe area, super cool to see out there too. But yeah, I really enjoyed that section. You're like running on like a ridge. It's pretty much all smooth single track. I ran on this like really, really well. I think I was averaging like 10 or 12-minute miles on like this section. Probably have that written down somewhere in here. Let's see, I can actually tell you if anyone's interested in the numbers. Let's see. So going to Red Star's averaging like 12 and a halves. Yeah. So I don't know if anyone cares, but if you're planning for yours 24-hour finish, figure I might throw the numbers at you since I got them here anyway. Yeah. Let's see. Trying to think, there was like a pretty few cool views in particular along that. If you want to see what it looks like, once again, check out the YouTube video. But yeah, a lot of like the trek to Red Star Ridge and then even Duncan Canyon kind of like molded together. You're basically just like on a ridge line and like you're going you're just like on a ridge line with like mountains all around you. It's like pretty cool. A lot of it is just like rolling, so it's not like super, super fast. You're not going to be able to run. Like what I was saying before is like everyone talks about how smooth and quick Western States is. A race that has 23,000 feet of downhill at first glance sounds like it's an incredibly quick course, but it still has 18,000 feet of gain. And I think people forget that. They just think about the idea of, oh, it's a net downhill course. But that doesn't mean that like the whole course is downhill. There's still a lot of climbing involved, and there's a lot more rocks on those sections from like Red Star Ridge to Duncan Canyon, where like you are it's just like more technical and a little slower, and there's more rolling hills that you have to go through than you would have otherwise expected. Honestly, a lot of that stuff looked the same. I don't really think I have a whole lot of updates from a Red Star Ridge over to Duncan. Trying to think just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Oh, I will say at Red Star Ridge, that was the first time where that was the first time where I really started icing up at the event. So really good tip for anyone getting ready for Western States is that if you want to do well in a hot race or at Western States in general, or a hot race in general, super important to make sure that you are thermoregulating. So keeping your core body temperature at an appropriate level. That's super important because first of all, the way your body works essentially is it sends blood from your organs, your internal area towards like the outer part of like your skin, and that does two things. The first is that helps cool you off. So that helps cool you off because your blood and your internal area is like really hot. So essentially that blood getting moved to like the outer part of your body helps cool your internal organs so that you don't overheat. The other thing that does is that what's the word I'm looking for? Fluid. That blood essentially, the fluid there essentially gets used as sweat. And so that also is the other thing that helps cool you off. But the more you can like keep your body in a thermoregulated state where you have a lot of ice on the outside of your skin. So I highly recommend arm sleeves, buff, or a bandana, either work. And then a hat or a bucket hat. Bucket hats work really well to hold ice. Anyways, the point is the more you can like use that at aid stations, the more you're going to be able to keep your body in like a homeostasis. And that's also important because the more blood flow you have going to an organ like your gut, the better your body is able to process foods, right? And if you want to avoid GI distress, that's like super, super important. So, I started icing up at Red Star Ridge, and that was the first time that I did that, and it worked really, really well for me throughout the race. I'm going to say it again because it worked really well for me. Arm sleeves worked really, really well. Highly, highly recommend them. I'm probably not going to run another hot race without them and their ability to store ice. And they also work really well whenever you pass like a stream or like any water in general, because then you could use something like I was wearing a buff, not one of those ice bandanas, but you could use your buff as like a sponge when you reach anything like that. And I would just like use my I would use my buff as a sponge and just like cool off my arms and my back and my head, and it just like worked really well as a combination. The course kind of just continues to roll its way along from Red Star over to Duncan. You still have like a lot of the similar views. It's through like a forest and then like exposed on ridgeline at other times. For the most part, it's like smooth, dusty single track, but like there are a few points along it that are still like rocky and loose. Nothing is as like consistently technical as like the Granite Chief Wilderness at like the beginning. But yeah, once I got to Duncan Canyon, it's funny. Once I got to the Duncan aid station, there was a guy who recognized me from Bighorn, which was kind of funny, but kind of just continued the same routine at like all my aid stations throughout the race. Just making sure to use ice to the best of my ability, using my tailwind, making sure getting that refilled, going to my three favorites, M&Ms, watermelon, and chips at the aid station, and kind of just continuing on. I will say after Duncan Canyon, that's really when the course does start to change quite significantly. That's when after that point, it really goes from like running through like the mountains per se to you have like this really nice downhill section that's super smooth and beautiful. And that goes all the way down to Duncan Creek over there. So that section through the forest was really beautiful, but like there are a few points on like that descent where you can start to kind of see the mountains in like the distance and like the canyons that you're going to be running through. I was looking out at like this vast, dry and hot desert mountain area, and I was wondering like, where's Robinson Flat? So it was kind of cool. Really, it's your first glimpse of like what's lying ahead for you. Also, I think there was like a fire in that area, so that area does start to get a bit more exposed once you hit the creek compared to the first like 25 miles of the course where you're under all these nice, lush, beautiful trees that are giving you a lot of shade. So it is the first part of the course where you are going to start feeling the heat. But yeah, like I said, once what I was doing like with my buff, super important. Like once you get to a creek like Duncan Creek, I thought it was going to be a bit higher. It was only like maybe a little bit above my ankles in terms of the water level, but I expected it to be a lot higher. I tried my best to like squat down, and I was like, if my feet are wet already, I might as well just like lay in the water and cool off for a second. And when I tried to do that, my muscles just cramped. So that's why having a buff and using that as like a sponge is so important, I think, because it's not always super easy to just like lay down mid-race. But yeah, the climb out of there reminded me of Like if anyone has run Black Canyon, there's a lot of like those like they're like dry riverbeds, right? And you like run into them, and then there's like not a steep incline, but it's definitely, I would call it like a runnable uphill that you take to get out of there. And so I thought that the climb coming out of Duncan Creek was very I thought that the climb, like coming out of Duncan Creek, was like very, yeah, to me, runnable. You know, if you have like a grade of like 300 or 400 feet for like a trail near you at home, those are really good types of trails to practice for something like Western, I think. There are some steep climbs, especially in like the canyons, but like that climb out of Duncan Creek and some of the climbs out of like the canyons are fairly like runnable if you're good on that kind of stuff. And that's really like my forte. So I was able to really shine there, even with like really wet feet. I still, from the creek crossing, I was still able to log 12-ish minute miles up that. And it did start to get hot, but it wasn't too bad. That section feels like it really just like zigs and zags and like goes on and on for a while. I think that Western States technically is like 101 miles instead of 100. Just going to tell you all now because yeah, that's an important little detail, especially if you care about your time a lot. So just something that is noteworthy, because I think when I ran into Robinson Flat, I was like wondering where the aid station was as my watch had clicked like the 31-mile marker. But yeah, that section super smooth, but there isn't a whole lot of tree cover on like that run upwards out of the creek. It's mostly uphill until you get to Robinson Flat from there. And yeah, I thought that I did a really good job fueling just for like that first 50K of the race. Yeah, I was averaging like 250 to 300 calories per hour. I was doing some mental math at this point before rolling into Robinson Flat, as anyone else should, because for a lot of people, this is the first time where you see your crew. So, I knew I was averaging like 250, 300 calories per hour. I was drinking, I think it was like somewhere between 0.8 or like 1 full liter. I think I was averaging like it was like 0.75, I think, liters per hour is what I wrote down after the races, like my final math tally of like hydration status and fueling status and like the beginning of the race. And I think that's super important to make sure you're starting off fueling well, especially before it gets super hot in the canyon section. And it also is good to make sure you're having like an idea of what you're taking in, because when you get to a big aid station like Robinson Flat, where for many people it's the first time you're seeing your crew, you have a good idea of like what you need and can ask for from them when you see them. For those not familiar, the Western States course, like I was talking about, it runs on like a ridge for the first 25 miles. And because of that, there's like essentially that ridge splits. There's like 2 highways, one to the north and one to the south. And because of that, if you have a crew, they have they have 2 options in terms of like where do you as the runner want them to go. So basically they can go to the north, and they can go, which is the more popular option, because it's just more convenient, I think, logistically. But yeah, if they go to the north, then they go to Robinson Flat at mile 31. That's the first time you see them, and then you can see them again at Michigan Bluff at mile 55, and then you see them at Forest Hill at mile 62. On the flip side, if you have maybe you have a second crew, or maybe you would prefer, for one reason or the other, that your crew goes to the south side, they would meet you at Duncan Canyon, which is mile 24.4. And then what's the other one? I think they meet you at, is it Dusty Corners, mile like 38? Don't quote me on that, but it's something like that, and you have the option. And then from Dusty Corners, they would then go to Forest Hill at mile 62. So you have options in terms of like where you're going to send your crew. A lot of the professional runners, they have 2 crews, which is also an option that you can adopt. If you have 2 crews, you can send some of your crew members to the north and then some to the south, and then that way you see crew 4 times instead of 2 times before you hit Forest Hill. But just the way that Western States is set up, your crew's only seeing you like twice, like before the 100K marker, which is not really a lot, especially, when like my parents come out to the race and they want to see me as like much as possible. Anyways, at Robinson Flat, this is where I changed from wearing a pack, and I was already wearing a waist belt, but I dropped the pack and I just wore a waist belt. I was also wearing John G shorts, which for me, they worked really well in terms of storage. They have like these really big pockets, and I was able to put like my phone on like my right hip, and then on my left, I was able to basically squeeze in. I wear contacts, so I always have like an extra pair of contacts, because you can't run if you can't see, right? And then I also had like some scratch gummies in like that pocket, and then in my waist belt, I had like one water bottle with Tailwind, and then I had a whole bunch of more Tailwind packets for the canyons, and then I also had a 250 milliliter soft flask of maple syrup, and then I used a handheld. So on total on me, I was still able to carry like 1 full liter, and then those 250 milliliter things of maple syrup, that's equivalent to about 800 calories, plus I had like the scratch thing on me. So I was carrying like, I mean, if you include the Tailwind calories, I was carrying somewhere in the realm of like upwards of like 2,000 calories on me at the start of like the canyons. And I figured when I saw my crew again at Michigan Bluff, I gave them a few extra things in case I needed more. But the last thing you want to do is run out of like what you really need in the hardest section of the course. So yeah, my transition there was pretty smooth. I think it's important to make sure that you're taking care of your feet at a race like Western, where it's like very dusty, and there's really like 2 spots on the course where you get your feet wet. The first is that Duncan Creek, so it was nice to, like, if you can only have your crew go to one place, I mean, the way I did it is the way that I'm going to tell people. Like, if you only have one crew, I recommend sending them to Robinson Flat, and I think that was a good place for the first time to meet them because I was able to do a shoe change. My socks and my shoes were still pretty damp from the creek crossing there, so that was one of the big reasons why I had them meet me at Robinson Flat. And the other one was just because I thought it would be a good place to start, being able to shed layers like my running pack, and I was using just my Ultimate Direction vest. I thought it was a nice place to shed that and start running light through a really hot part of the course where you don't really need a lot of gear. This is not a mountain 100 like the Bear 100 where it's like maybe 80 degrees or like 75 degrees during the day, and then all of a sudden it's like 20 degrees at night, right? You don't need to have like a winter jacket on you for like a weather change or something at Western. I'm sure that some years maybe there's an anomaly, but for the most part, you don't need a lot of gear with you, so you don't need to be able to carry a lot. So it's nice to be able to move light after you're out of something like that first 30 miles where the aid stations are spread a little bit further apart. But yeah, so shoe change, shed the pack, picked up a handheld. What else did I do there? That's of note. Just the usual icing up at the aid station, getting a few extra things to eat there. But it was good to see the family. Got a selfie with Mom. If you see the YouTube video, you'll kind of see how our aid station was set up. One thing I'll say is, like, if you want to really take advantage of being at a race like Western, just because you're not a front runner, let me make this super clear. Just because you're not winning the race doesn't mean you can't treat it like you're trying to do the best that you possibly can. Just because you're not winning doesn't mean your race isn't important. If you want to go sub 24, you got to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, right? And that means giving your crew a super organized list of everything that you want them to do when they get to an important aid station like Robinson Flat. That way, when you get there, they have your handheld, one with water, one with a mix of Tailwind or whatever electrolyte you're using. They can have that ready for you. They can have it on ice. They can have a cooler ready for you to put like ice in all the spots that you want them to put ice. It's super important that if you have expectations for how a race is going to go, that you get that across as clearly as possible to your crew. And I did a really good job with that. If anyone actually wants to reach out, shoot me an email, Journey Running LLC. I have a whole PowerPoint that I created for my crew meeting. It's obviously customized to myself, but I'd be happy to share that with anyone. It might be a really good starting place for you to prep your Western States 100 run if you are planning for it. So yeah, feel free to shoot me an email if you want a copy of that, and you can customize it to yourself. But yeah, so that's everything I did at Robinson. It was a cool aid station. All the aid stations at Western have pretty big crowds compared to like other trail races, especially in like the US. I said the US just because, compared to stuff like UTMB, I think it's a little bit quieter here in terms of spectators. But like Twin Lakes at Leadville Forest Hill's probably a little bit busier than that, but Twin Lakes is really the only other aid station I have seen in my time running ultras in the U.S. that would compare to like a Western States. Oh, and then just for reference, I got into Robinson Flat in about 6 hours and 12 minutes, which was right around like my ETA, and then I left in like 6 hours and 20 minutes, which would be like 11:20 a.m. And the other thing I did was I switched from like just a regular cap to a bucket hat when I was going into the canyons, because bucket hats can hold more ice. I don't really like them because I feel like my visibility isn't as good when I'm running, like especially uphill with them, but I like having a cap because then I can flip it around and see better. But Anyways, I think it's a good little detail because, you want to be able to carry as much ice and stay as cool as possible in a race like Western. But yeah, let's see. So I'm going to grab a quick drink of water. I do not edit my podcast other than the beginning and the intros and outros. Little comments like that always stay in. At least you hear it from the heart. If I make any mistakes, it stays. All right, so leaving Robinson Flat. So if you look at a course profile of Western States, you'll see that there is a beautiful downhill half marathon when you leave Robinson Flat up until you hit Last Chance at mile 43. So when I was leaving Robinson, I didn't realize, but like it was like 3 miles maybe out of Robinson is all just like a hot, dusty road that's super exposed, but it's just like a road, just for it's like there's cars on it, like, and there was a few motorcycles on it, like while I was running that section too. Like it's and anyone who has run anything like that knows during a race that the dust that any vehicle picks up is super annoying to inhale. Anyways, a side note, but yeah, that section was way flatter and faster than I anticipated. I knew going into the race that this was going to be a super fast section. I kind of looked at it as like a trap because I thought that if you look at the course profile, the other place where you can really make time is from on paper at least, is from Forest Hill at mile 62 to the river crossing. Because that all essentially looks like downhill miles when you're going from Forest Hill through the Dardanelles or the Cows, whatever you want to call them, to Rucky Chucky. But that section actually ended up being a lot more rolling and technical and just not as speedy as I had anticipated. So I was really planning to make a move there. And so I didn't really go as fast as I probably could have when I was running the 13 miles from mile 30 to 43. I looked at it as a trap, as I'm sure a lot of other people do, but if I were to do it again, I'd probably push that section a little bit faster. And if anyone is wondering, let me pull up the stats again. I can tell you my mile times through those were still in the 12s. Yeah. So I ran in like 12:47. Was that right? Let's see. Section pace, yeah. So my section pace going through, that was, so like 12 minutes to Miller's Defeat at mile 34.4, 10 and a half minutes to Dusty Corners at mile 38, and 11 minutes to 11:05 to Last Chance at mile 43.3. So I guess you could say I was averaging like 11-minute pace through that 13-mile section. If I were to do it again, I'd probably try and go maybe a little faster. I feel like I could have shaved off, at least like a minute per mile on that. And it doesn't sound like much, but 13 minutes at the end of the race, maybe I like could have pushed to a sub 23-hour finish. I ran a 23:17. So, that stuff does that. It all does matter. But yeah, most of that, so it starts on like a road essentially. And let me go back to my notes here. Probably lost where I was. Yeah. Alrighty. So, leaving Robinson Flat, you start on that road. It's downhill, super fast, and then you do end up on like single track a few miles later. So, mile like 34 essentially to mile 43.3, which is Last Chance, is all like single track. Yeah, it's like almost all single track, and there's some like rolling in there. I can't say there's like zero elevation gain, but one of the things that's cool is like there are a lot of aid stations there. Like I just went through them. There's 3 aid stations that you hit from after Robinson Flat at mile 31 to Last Chance at mile 43. So you're hitting an aid station every like 4 miles, right? And because of that, I will say at Miller's Defeat at mile 34, that was the first time where I actually started to get like kind of annoyed by the amount of ice that I was going through during the day, because I was just wet the whole day from the ice that was like melting in my arm sleeves and my buff and in my hat. And I was also just soaked from all the sponge baths. And every time I had stopped at like, for example, Duncan Creek to use the water there. And you're like, you spend a lot of your race wet at Western States. So I was using those Janji shorts. And for me, they worked really well when I used them at like Quad Rock 50 miler, which was a race I ran in lead up to Western. It was like my 3rd time running Quad Rock. I thought it'd be a good like just race to just get ready for prep for Western, and I wore those shorts there, had no problems. But at Western, I was just wet a lot more, and I started to have chafing issues because, gravity takes that water and that ice and it puts it to your nether regions. One thing to keep in mind for Western is just making sure that you do a good job looping up and making sure that you're using gear that you are confident in. I was confident in those shorts at the time. The benefit of them was that I could run through the canyons and be light without like a vest, for example. But the big con of them was that there was some chafing in places you don't want to chafe. But yeah, Miller's defeat started to get really annoyed with just like the amount of ice I was going through there. But like if you're running a really hot ultra and you want to do well and you want to thermoregulate well, you have to just suck it up and do it. There are some times in this sport where if you want to be successful, you just gotta be tough, and that's one of them. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, like I would say that section was from like a views point, like you're kind of just running through like some forest that is very hot and dusty and dry, and for the first like maybe 7 miles of like that half marathon, it's like there's nothing like spectacular about it in terms of like views or anything like that. I have this weird thing during like ultras. Reach out to me if you also experience this, where my knees for whatever reason will start to hurt at mile like 30, and then it lasts for like a few miles and then it goes away. So this has happened at like multiple hundreds to me, and then I have like no aches or pains for the rest of the race. I have no idea like why this happens, but that was happening to me in that section, and slowed me up just a little bit. I was getting a little bit like annoyed from mile like I think 30 to 35-ish. My knees were feeling a little achy, and then, the sensation goes away and it's just like totally fine. I also had another issue at like after dusty corners at mile 38, I think around like mile 39 to like 41-ish. I had like this issue where I felt really like bloated, and because I had like just put more ice all over my body at like the aid station there, I also had this sensation where there was all this cold ice on my body, and then the trail kind of like veers off into like this single track section where you're like running along a canyon wall, and because you're like not technically in the canyons, like after Last Chance at mile 43, that's really like where the canyons section starts. But like you're running along this canyon wall on your way to Last Chance aid station, and like you can feel the heat that's being trapped in like the canyons around you. And they say heat rises, so I don't know if like just that section where you're like running under this canyon wall is just, you're like basically at the top of the canyon, and it was just like so hot, and it felt like I was breathing in sauna air, which when it contrasted with all the ice that was on my body, it just felt like kind of nauseating, which was like really concerning. And then funny enough, like at mile 41-ish, I just like totally ripped ass a few times, and all of a sudden my bloating went away, my nausea went away, and I totally felt totally fine. Yeah, it's really weird. That actually ended up happening to me at Leadville also. Oddly, that happened at mile like 16 of Leadville, and at Leadville, I was like, oh, this is how I felt at mile like 40 at Western. And sure enough, I just had to like pass gas. Very odd sensation. I know that David Roach, because I was fueling with essentially liquid calories and maple syrup. I know David Roach talks about like pooping on the side of trails, doing like high carb all the time. So I don't know if maybe that was a result of my fueling plan or what at both of those races. But, that was really the only GI distress that I experienced for the entirety actually of Western States. Which was good because, when I was having like that issue at mile 40, I was starting to get worried because I was like, I'm not even in the canyons. I'm not even in the canyons, and I'm feeling this way. Like, what's it going to be like when it's, 20 degrees hotter, and yeah, am I going to be able to eat? Am I going to feel worse? It was a bit like intimidating, but luckily everything kind of shaped up, and I started to feel myself again by the time I rolled into Last Chance. And by that point, I was actually very confident and excited, but a little bit nervous to be tackling the canyons. I knew I really needed to be smart when I was running through them. But, I just did my usual things at Last Chance: chips, watermelon M's, refilling my water, getting ice. You can see a theme. I keep bringing this up because I think that when you're running a race like Western with so many aid stations, a really big point for anyone listening who's going to run this race is like you gotta be dialed in. You gotta know what works for you. You gotta be efficient through aid stations. If you roll in and you don't know what you need, you're already setting yourself up for not success. Anyways, the canyons were the first canyons. So the three. We'll just overview them quickly. The first one is Deadwood Canyon, the second one is El Dorado Canyon, and the third one is Volcano Canyon. So Deadwood Canyon is by far the hardest one. The hardest one in terms of technicality. It's a single track trail that like dips down to the swinging bridge, and it's like a mile, and you lose like over 1,000 feet or something like that. And it was a lot more steep and technical and rocky and hot and dusty than I had anticipated it being. I thought that the canyons were going to be like, 400 feet kind of per mile descents, and then smooth ascents, and then smooth descents and ascents. So I practiced that a lot in training. Luckily, I live in Boulder, Colorado, so with some pretty big peaks here just at my doorstep, I was prepared to run like steep uphill and downhill pretty well. But I thought that it was a little bit of surprising just like how tough that descent into Deadwood Canyon was, considering once again how everyone just talks about Western states, California, flowy single track, and that's really not the case, especially in that first canyon. After you run through the first canyon though, and you get to like the swinging bridge, there is very shortly after that like a little spring, which is cool because I was able to, it was pretty dang hot down there, and it was really nice to be able to use that water to cool myself off. And I was feeling really, really good through this canyon. The climb out of Deadwood Canyon is like, my watch clocked 1,200 feet in that first mile that leads up out and out of the canyon. It is closer to like 2,000 feet in terms of the total ascent that you need to go through in like the 2 miles ish that go to Devil's Thumb, which is that next aid station there. But yeah, I mean, once again, the climb coming out of Deadwood was kind of this, it was basically just the reverse of your descent. So, I mean, I don't really have much more to say about it. I've personally felt really, really good while I was doing that because I was feeling well, I was hydrating well. I didn't really have any more GI distress after that one incident, and like, I just really like hiking really, really well up, like doing uphills like that. I think that there's no better feeling than doing what you love at a really high level, and that was a really cool moment, just hiking out of Deadwood Canyon, being like, man, like I'm coming up on mile 50. I got like 2 more canyons to go. I've already done the first hard ascent of the race at the beginning. I've done like the hardest, I'm about to finish the hardest canyon. We're coming up at mile 50 in almost 10 hours. So I think it was around like the 9.5 hour mark when I was coming out of, Deadwood Canyon there. But yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it, but I know that a lot of people around me at that point in the race were not. So make sure that you're mentally getting prepared for that first canyon, because it is significantly harder compared to the others, which I'll talk about in a moment. It was funny when I rolled into mile 47.8 at Devil's Thumb. I told them that I was really enjoying the canyon so far, and I thought that they thought that it was, I think they were just like, this is the only person who has said that he like enjoyed that so far. But yeah, anyways, don't take that first canyon lightly, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Once again, I can pull up my splits here. Sorry, I got them at like the bottom of this Word document, so every time I reference them, I have to like scroll down 20 pages because I wrote a lot about this race. So I averaged 17-minute miles from Last Chance to Devil's Thumb, and I got there in, it's 9 hours and 56 minutes. So that was like 9 hours 56, so just before the 10-hour mark. My watch clocked Devil's Thumb as like 48.5 miles-ish or something like that. So just for reference, like I said, Western is more like 101 miles compared to the 100 that I guess it's advertised. Somebody out there, I'm sure, cares about that detail. Anyways, yeah, so after you leave Devil's Thumb, the trail out of there, it starts out pretty easy. You're just winding through just trails in the woods there. It's actually kind of shaded. It's not too bad. Fairly runnable for probably like 2 miles before you start descending again. Yeah, in that time, I passed the mile 50 marker in 10 hours and 20 minutes, which was, I think, like slightly slower than I had anticipated running. I was shooting for like a 10 hours to be at 10 hours at the 50-mile marker in 10 hours. And I was there in 10:20. But, I kind of had a moment with myself, which was, I would say, maybe profound is the word, maybe not. Anyways, I was just like really happy with the start of my day. I felt great. I really trained my ass off for this race. Once again, I did a whole podcast on that, so I don't really feel like it needs to be discussed again. But I I trained my ass off for Western States to make the most of the opportunity, and I was really proud of the start of the race and how I was feeling and the work and the effort that I was exerting. And I kind of had a heart to heart with myself and was like, you know what? For the first time in all these months of training leading up to the race, running sub 24 has been my goal, my dream. But if it doesn't happen, then I'm still going to be really happy with myself because I knew I was putting in my best effort. And that was a nice little moment to have. Anyways, continuing on, the run down El Dorado Canyon, I will say, although the canyons become softer and softer grades as the race progresses, I think it's important to note that El Dorado it felt like the hottest canyon of the three. It was definitely hotter than Deadwood Canyon. Maybe it was because just the day had been, gets hotter as the day goes on. But the descent was a lot easier of a grade, which was nice because you could run a bit faster down it as opposed to it was a lot less technical and rocky compared to Deadwood Canyon. Still, I mean, the whole course is really like dusty and hot. You can't really do much about that, right? I felt like in the moment when I was running down El Dorado Canyon, I thought to myself, as my ice from the aid station at Devil's Thumb was melting, because it's kind of a long descent down to the aid station there. It just feels like a lot of switchbacks that you're going on. But I really felt like that's where the sauna training had. I was like, this is like where the sauna training gets to shine and doing your heat training before the race because it was just so friggin' hot. The other thing that was kind of annoying though was we passed this sign right before. So you're on like kind of a double track trail for a few miles out of Devil's Thumb and then you hit a single track trail where the real descent starts. And right before it became single track, there was a little sign that said beware wasps or bees or something. And I didn't see any for like 2 miles. And then all of a sudden there's like this little muddy, marshy area. And there's just an unbelievable amount of wasps. And I cannot believe I did not get stung, but I think it was Jeff Browning said that his race was very much changed because of that section, and he definitely got stung. So yeah, just watch out, I guess, on that section. I don't know if that's typical every year or not, but I thought that it was noteworthy because there's people who get stung by bees and they're allergic to them. There's actually somebody, side note, I was running Cascade Crest and I was checking into the race that morning and somebody got stung online to pick up their bib that morning, which was really wild. Not how you want to start a 100-mile race. Anyways, he ended up fine. He actually ended up finishing Cascade Crest that year, so that was kind of cool. But quick side note. Otherwise, the run down El Dorado Canyon, it kind of just feels like a forest that was like burned on fire. There's no shade and like the whole thing on the whole way down. It's just hot and dusty, and outside of the wasps there, it's just like a tough environment to run. I think that the canyons feel very much like the Mogollon Monster 100. Like the first 25 miles of Western States felt like Cascade Crest if I was going to compare it to another 100 miler, and then the 75 miles after that felt very reminiscent in a lot of ways of Mogollon Monster, just in terms of like you're running through canyons and it's hot and it's dry and it's rocky and technical in some spots, more so than people will tell you. So that's why I'm telling you here. But yeah, anyways, I don't know. I really enjoyed the canyons overall. I thought it was funny when I got down to the bottom of El Dorado Canyon, there was like the aid station had a radio there and I heard Dylan Bowman's voice on the radio, like talking about he was announcing just like the race results and how everything was going at that moment. So I thought it was kind of cool that all the aid station volunteers were like listening in and I was able to hear who was 1, 2, 3 at that point in time, which was cool. But yeah, once again, I kind of just, did my usual thing. One of the volunteers there had made a comment to me about how he thought I was using too much sodium when he saw my like double pack of the Tailwind double serving, 630 milligrams in there, and I didn't have time to explain all the sports science to him about why I was doing it. I was just like, trust me, man. But I bring that up just because, I know he meant well, but just as a reminder to anyone, like if you have a strategy in place for your race, just make sure that like you got to be confident in it. And when somebody makes a comment that maybe challenges you or your plan, just ignore it. It's like if you're actually confident in what you're doing, then you will just ignore what somebody else says and you'll stick with it. So just quick side note, you got to be confident in your plan because you don't want to change things in the moment and then like that's where things can really get derailed, right? Alrighty. So yeah, that was my experience going down El Dorado. The climb out was it felt like once again the same grade as the way in. The climb out was too steep, I felt like, to run most of it. There was a few spots where there's always like a few footsteps where you can run here and there, but it was definitely significantly less of a grade when you compare it to like the climb out of Deadwood, though. So I thought that was nice and made for the hike out to be a little bit faster. I think at the aid station, somebody said it would take me like 55 minutes and to get up to Michigan Bluff at mile 55, and it took me like an hour. Ooh, do I have that written down? I might be able to find that. Let me see if I have that on this document here. Oh, they do have the splits. All right. At El Dorado Creek, I was there at 11:01, and I got to Michigan Bluff in 11:59, so it took me 58 minutes. Damn. I guess I'm ruining the bell curve. I think when they said that to me, I was like, 55 minutes, I'm going to do it in 54. Oh, that's funny. Anyways, yeah, the climb out was pretty much like the climb in. All the trees around you are not really providing any shade. It's hot, it's dusty, it's just typical Western states. So, yeah, just continue to eat and hydrate and follow your nutrition plan. And then once I got up to Michigan Bluff, let's see, yeah, when I ran into Michigan Bluff, a man in a banana costume at the end of the road was excitedly jumping up and down to greet me as I rolled in, and it ended up being my pacer, Joel. I was like, how the fuck did you get a banana costume into your suitcase that I didn't see in our Airbnb? But apparently he had borrowed it from somebody over there. Anyways, yeah, it was really great to see the crew there again. I don't think I really needed much from them. I didn't do any more shoe changes until after the river crossing, but yeah, it was nice to see crew one more time, and he was stoked to be able to tell me that he was excited to run with me at Forest Hill. Not super eventful. Michigan Bluff is, there's a lot of people cheering you on at the aid station there, but it's not a particularly like big town or anything like that. Like you're at the aid station, you run out maybe for a few hundred yards before you leave the technical like crewing area, and then you're back on like a road, and you're kind of on a road there for a while, just like a dirt road, kind of similar to the one that leads you out of Robinson Flat. I was very intimidated by the last canyon, Volcano Canyon, because I spent a lot of time. I don't even know how many times I listened to this podcast, but there's a really good podcast with Jason Coop and AJW on the Coopcast, where AJW, it's mostly AJW doing like a run through of the Western States 100 course, and I listened to that like religiously in my lead up, probably like once a week or once every other week. I love that man's enthusiasm for the race. AJW is so passionate about Western States, and it's great to hear his course recap. So if you like this one, you should check that one out too. But in that episode, AJW talks a lot about the last canyon, Volcano Canyon, and how it's so intimidating. And he was like, the first time I ran Western States, I knew I wasn't going to do it again until I nailed this canyon. I really took that to heart. But personally, I have a different opinion. I felt like Volcano Canyon was very short. After a few miles of like winding roads that are like rolling, and yes, hot still and exposed. Like once you do that, you end up on a single track trail in like the forest, and it's a bit shaded again. And the canyon is much more reminiscent of like my personal strengths, which are like 300, 400 foot per mile descents, and then ascents. I'm really good at like running those kind of descents and those kind of ascents. So for me personally, I thought that canyon was fairly easy compared to the others, and it went by very quickly. I think it only took like, I can pull up my spreadsheet again. Let's see, it took me from Michigan Bluff. I was there at 11:59, and I was at Forest Hill in 13:26. So it took me an hour and 27 minutes, that means, to do that whole canyon. I just didn't really find it to be as difficult as the others. For reference, it was like 110 degrees. I said that it was hot like 1,000 times on this episode so far, but I never actually said the actual temperature. It was like 110 degrees that day in the canyons. But one of the great benefits of heat training, so sauna protocols and using ice at all of the aid stations, no matter how close they were to each other, was that I did not feel the heat at all. I never felt like the heat was ever an issue for me at Western States. I actually, when I was running Quad Rock, or after running Quad Rock, I was talking to Nick Clark, the race director for Now Runners, and he had famously finished, I think it was like third or fourth the year of the Unbreakable documentary, and then he went back like a year later and he got second at Western States to Killian. I think that's accurate. Anyways, I talked to him about his experiences at Western States, and he said that the heat was never an issue for him because of all the ice that he used at aid stations. And when he told me that, I was a little bit skeptical. I was like, how in the world is 110 degrees not going to be an issue for you? And I have to say he was right. I mean, he knows his stuff. I should have believed him in the moment more than I did. But yeah, if you do, it just goes to show, like, if you do a really good job thermoregulating, the heat should not be an issue for you at Western States. Anyways, yeah, Volcano Canyon, you start on that dusty. You start on that double track dirt road, and then you end up on a single track trail for a little bit. You go down on like that relatively smooth grade, and then you go up. I think that it happens fairly quickly, and then once you're like on your way out of Volcano Canyon, you end up you like pop out onto a road, and just like a concrete road, and it's also not a super steep grade. I was able to run like most of it, and then your pacer is allowed to meet you at, let's see if my memory serves me correctly, because I'm recording this Saturday, October 25th. So Western States was now 4 months ago. Your pacer can meet you at Forest Hill. The road is Forest Hill, and then there's an intersection. I can't remember the name of the road off the top of my head. Your pacer can meet you at like the end of the road that you're running up out of the canyon, though, and they can run from mile like it's 60 or 1, and then they can run that extra mile or two into the aid station with you, something like that. Did I write it down, actually? It's Bath Road. I wrote it down. Yeah, so it's the intersection of Forest Hill Road and Bath Road, and so that's where your pacer is allowed to meet you at Western States. You don't have to go all the way into Forest Hill before you first start running with them. And that's helpful because like I was able to see Joel and give him a recap of how I was feeling, which was freaking great. Like I was feeling great, and it was really nice to be able to tell him that. But if you're like not feeling great, or if you need something, your pacer could hypothetically like run ahead of you through the aid station and to like wherever your crew has stuff set up, and they can start like preparing stuff for you a little bit faster. But yeah, so that was super cool. Let's see, along the way, I saw Buff had like a nice stand set up, and they had like one of those posters that was like, give us a high five and you'll get a power boost. So that was kind of cool. And they like read me a fun fact, which I wrote to myself before the race at the expo the day before, and I really appreciated that. That was awesome. Love their energy out there. Then, yeah, rolled up. Once you hit like Forest Hills Road, you're just on like a flat road that takes you to like the aid station. If you watch documentaries of famous runners like Jim Walmsley, any documentaries of like anyone winning Western States, the crowds at Forest Hill look just like insane. It's not really like that for us, not front of the pack people. There's still a lot of people there. It's hectic. There's a lot of people giving you high fives and supporting you and cheering you on, but it's not quite as crazy as like what you see on YouTube, unless you are listening to this and you are one of maybe those top 10 male or female runners. But yeah, once I got to Forest Hill, that's really where I like swapped back into my so I did get into Forest Hill in 13 hours, 26 minutes, which was, I think, a little bit slower than what I had anticipated before the race. I was shooting for a little closer to 13, but I figured I was still in good shape, and I did end up being in good shape. But yeah, once I got to like Forest Hill, that's where I actually dropped my waist belt. So I stopped using that, and I started using my running pack again, and that transition was super quick because yeah, everything that I needed was in there. I didn't really have to like pick up anything other than the pack itself and take off the little waist belt that I had on. So that was a nice quick aid station, and then it was fun to run through the remainder of like the Forest Hill Road. There was, I think, like an ice bath down the road that somebody had set up, so I threw a little more water on like my head, and it was nice to pick up my pacer Joel. I was super stoked to be running with him. And then what else? I don't know. I always try to give like the little kids high fives. I think it's cool when like a 5-year-old is out on like an ultra running course, like supporting people that they don't even know why they're there sometimes, I think. But, I think they get a lot of excitement and joy out of like people giving them high fives. So if you see anybody out, like the little ones out there, just give them a high five. Makes their day. Let's see. Yeah, once you run through Forest Hill, it's kind of like short. I had like this vision in my head of Forest Hill being like really long and smooth descent, but you actually pop out onto like a single track trail pretty quickly. It almost like pops out into someone's backyard, it feels like. And then the Dardanelles, or depending on what you call it, it's like the Cal Street section, because the aid stations are called like Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, and the Cals are spaced basically every like few miles apart. They're also called like the Dardanelles. So yeah, a lot of people will just use those terms interchangeably, right? So I can actually pull up those aid stations right now. So those aid stations take place so Forest Hills at mile 62, and then you have Cal 1 is at mile 65.7, Cal 2 is at 70.7, so it's only 3.7 to the first one, and then like 5 miles to the second, and then, Cal 3 is mile 73, so 2.3 to that one, and then 5 more miles to Rocky Chucky at mile 78. So these aid stations are really close to each other. Through the Cals, I was averaging, let's see here, section pace. My section pace for them was in the 13, no. Yeah, it was like about 13-minute pace. I think the last one I was a little slow. Pace. Section pace. Yeah. Anyways, once again, just want to throw those details for anyone out there who cares about that stuff. Joel was super pumped on this section to tell me I was in 7th place. He wanted me to finish really badly in 69th. I finished in like 71st, so whoops. Anyways, so the cows, they all kind of like blended in. The first cal on the way to Cal 1, that was a lot of downhill. That was definitely like the smoothest, easiest, most runnable Cal section to run. But it's also like fairly short because you hit that at mile, what did I say it was, like 65.7 or something like that. So you really only have like a few miles to like make good time there. One of my mistakes in the race is like when I got to Cal 1, I was like super excited. It felt like now being 14 hours into the race that, it's like 7 o'clock at night, like it's going to be cooling off. But, you're in like a canyon that overlooks the American River there. So you can actually, the views of the American River, like while you're running through the Cal sections, is actually really underrated. I'm surprised more people don't talk about how beautiful and epic that view is, but that's super cool. But because it was almost sunset time, I had like kind of let my guard down, and I thought to myself, like I said before, I was getting really tired of using ice all day, so I thought that it was like the first time where maybe I wasn't going to do that, and so I didn't get ice at that section. And I kind of just took a few chips and rolled out, and I really ended up regretting that because on paper the Cal sections look like they just go completely downhill the same way the course does from like Robinson Flat to Last Chance at mile 31 to 43, but the section is not like that. The section is a lot more rolly, and every time the course would roll up, it really felt like a punch in the gut because I felt like, are we making any progress downhill to like the river? So I should have done a better job thermoregulating at Cal 1, but I didn't. And so now you can listen to my story and learn for yourself. Yeah, anyways, that section from Cal 1 to Cal 2 was probably my toughest point of the race because mentally I was just like struggling. I was starting to feel nauseous because of the heat, because I hadn't thermoregulated as like well as I should have at that aid station. It was getting tough to keep eating the same foods like Tailwind and maple syrup all day. I was starting to get some palate fatigue, and I was excited to start eating like ramen as the night time came on. So I just like really struggled with that. Went from having like really good conversations with Joel in that first Cal section to, asking him, I think, to, maybe just need some time to not have a conversation and just like focus at the task at hand. And we definitely lost a little bit of time, I think, on like that second Cal section because once we rolled into Cal 2, I had to like sit down for the first time the whole race outside of like changing my shoes, and like I did have some ramen and broth and some real food there, and I probably took like a good took close to like 10 minutes at that aid station to just get myself a little bit more put together. I think I was also a little bit low on sodium because I love my crew, but they forgot to like mix a Tailwind with like my water bottle when I picked it up at Forest Hill. So I think that there was like a few miles where I wasn't having as much sodium in like the hot environment because it was still super hot at that point. So that's why I went with ramen. I thought I was able to problem solve my way out of it and realized I was not feeling super great because I didn't have ice on me and because I didn't have my electrolytes as dialed in on that section as like I had intended to. So on the bright side, I was able to problem solve my way out of it. The other thing that was super cool about that section or that aid station at Cal 2 was There was a girl there who had seen one of my YouTube videos, and she was super stoked and excited, and I think that helped my energy get back up to normal, because I have a small podcast. Not a lot of people listen, at least as of now. And, some of my YouTube videos do really well. Like my Moab 241 has, I haven't checked it in a while, to be honest, but the last I looked, it had like 8,000 views. The second one, the first one has like 2,000 or 3,000 views. Because I ran Moab in 2021 and then 2023, so both have their own YouTube videos. Anyways, like those are my two, I guess, best by statistics. And, it's one thing to like see the view count, but it's another to like be able to put a face to some of those actual numbers. It's like cool to see the statistics, but like who are most, I look at the statistics and I'm like, who the hell are like most of these people? Like I'm really honored that like they've taken their valuable time to like watch my YouTube videos or take their valuable time to listen to things like this podcast. So I try my best to be really thorough when I'm doing something like a race description or race recap like this, because I want people to get as much out of it as they possibly can. But yeah, anyways, I guess all that to say, if you see me at a race, please do say hi. It's really cool to meet people who listen to the podcast or who have seen any of my YouTube videos. There was somebody at Leadville who was like on the out and deck at Winfield was like, "Hey, it's Stefan of the Journey Running Podcast." And I was like, who the hell was that? That was really cool though. And there were a few people at like the beginning of Western, like had my pack on and like before the race, and a few people had like said I'd seen your YouTube videos, and I thought that was really, really cool, because like I have a small channel. I have like 100 and not even 150 subscribers. So, I don't consider myself an influencer by any means. I don't think I want to ever be an influencer though. Anyways, that's another story for another day. But yeah, if you see me at a race, please do say hi. It's super cool. Let's continue on with the race. So yeah, after the Cal 2 section, the race started to feel a lot better again. Joel had my pacer. He told me that, we had probably lost a little bit of time on that section that we needed to start making up. In our minds, we were not sure if we were like right on the cusp of sub 24 or if we were like an hour ahead of it. We were really pushing, and I think that because, you only have that one chance to run Western every like 5 to 10 years for most of us, we really wanted to make sure that like my strong start to the race was being taken advantage of. Because of that, it just felt like there was a little bit of pressure. I don't think maybe tension is the right word between a runner and a pacer, where, the runner wants to, run their own race. And especially at mile like 75 now, do you really want to listen to someone when they say you got to push? But you have to do it as the runner. So I tried my best to listen to him, but I think there was a little bit of tension in terms of like, I was having trouble concentrating on a conversation while feeling nauseous, while like pushing, while also keeping in mind that like, this is my one shot, like every 5 to 10 years. It all combines to be just a lot of pressure, I think, in the moment. But, I think Joel handled it really well. He gently told me at one point that we had lost some time and that we needed to start picking it up. And as upset as I was, I listened to him on that section, and we did really well. Let's see, on that, after leaving Cal 2, it starts with like a nice little downhill. On that downhill, I actually saw like Tara Dower. She was running with the flu. Couldn't believe, it's like, I can't believe I just found someone wearing one of the professional ultra jerseys, but just based off of like how she looked, much props to her for, I think she dropped at once she got to the river, but much props to her for getting as far as she did, looking the way like she did. She looked like a ghost out there, and I felt really bad, but it was cool that she had like still tried her best to, perform as well as she did. On that note, it was also really cool to find out after the race that Adam Peterman, who had won the race, I forgot what year, forgive me, but he wasn't having the race that he had dreamed of, and ended up walking like the last 40 miles or something of the race and he finished like only 8 minutes ahead of me. And I think it's super cool when professional athletes like really try their best to get the job done, even though they're not having the day that, they want. A lot of them will just drop out and save their body the extra recovery time and start planning for the next one, because, that's their performance is an important part of their sponsorship. And I get that, but it's cool as an athlete who works really hard to get into Western States to see people make the most of it, or at least try to in Tara's case. But yeah, that section was downhill, a little less rolling, a little faster than the others. At this point, like there's not like, at that point, like the single track had been a lot like cleaner and less technical. There was a few spots that was also frustrating on my way to the Cal 2 section that were like really rocky and loose. So it really reminded me of like the Mogollon Monster because of that. If you go on my YouTube video, you'll like see some of that stuff, and it's really tough to run a steep, rocky, loose descent when you're like 70 plus miles into a race. But yeah, and then Cal 3, you're coming up on Cal 3 when the trail like spits you out onto like this climb that like abruptly starts. Somebody at the Cal 2 aid station had told me and Joel, like, it's called, I forgot, it was like 5 or 6 minute hill. Did I write it down anywhere? I think it was called like 5 minute hill. Maybe it was, anyways, it took 5 minutes to hike up. They were spot on, whatever it was. And that's how you know you're approaching Cal 3 is like you just have this hill that's like takes 5 minutes to hike up and then you get there. And then at Cal 3, I really started to switch into my new ritual of Coke and ramen at aid stations as opposed to like potato chips and watermelon during the day. So yeah, I really started to transition to some more solid foods with the ramen, which was nice. It's always nice to be able to get some solid food and just a different salty taste in your mouth instead of having maple syrup all day at Cal 3. So that was really nice. And then yeah, after Cal 3, you've got 5 miles. Let's see, so it took me, just for reference, 16 hours and 9 minutes is what it took me to get there. So that's mile 73 in 16:09. And then you've got like 5 miles to the river. And that's really a section where Joel had to do a great job like pushing me because I was continuing to struggle there a little bit. And I kept thinking like, oh, we're hiking at a good pace. Like we can just go, like if we just go like under 20-minute miles, we'll make this in under 24 hours. But Joel pushed me to run a bit more than I had wanted to, and that's what pacers are meant to do. They're meant to push you. And then on that down that Cal section, you can like see the river next to you, and you can kind of like hear the aid station for a while. So it's kind of cool because like you're just you've got like a really epic river crossing coming up. Yeah, and then when I got to like Rucky Chucky, my parents were able to go to this aid station too. So you can have your crew. Most people's crews will meet them on like the close side of Rucky Chucky. There's like a big spectator area set up. There's an aid station with like food and drinks and stuff. And then there is like a mini aid station on the far side of the river where really that's where they put drop bags. I presume they do that because people like me, like I put a dry pair of shoes and socks in that drop bag, and most people I assume are going to be changing into something dry after they do the river crossing, because most of us not professionals, plebeians per se, we're doing the river crossing at night. So yeah, let's see. I got to the river crossing in 17 hours and 13 minutes. So, it had like just gotten dark out at that point. What was that, like 9 or 10 o'clock or something? Eastern State starts at 5 a.m. So if I do math off the top of my head, watch out. I actually think I'm pretty good at mental math. Rucky Chucky is 17:13. That would be 10:13 p.m. So, it was definitely dark at that point. And then your trek across the river was, let me go back to my notes here. Yeah. Before that, I will say at 10:13, I decided at the Rucky Chucky aid station there at mile 78 to chug a Red Bull because that works well for me caffeine wise, and it also has like 200 calories. I had like 2 Red Bulls during the race. One was at Rucky Chucky, and then I also picked up another Red Bull for my parents at that same aid station, except I put it in the back of my pack, and I saved that for mile like 88 or something like that, like 10 miles later. So I had that at like 2 a.m., so I never got fatigued out there, as you could imagine. So that was my caffeine strategy for the race. It was mostly Red Bull, but I also had Coke at aid stations for the rest of the race. Let's see. So, yeah, the river crossing was interesting because it goes up to basically like your chest. Me and Joel we'd been smart and we took like some just plastic bags and put our phones in them. And we did that on the Cal 3 section to Rucky Chucky so that you don't want your phone to get fucked up from a river crossing, especially if you're trying to make a YouTube video on it. We basically waterproofed our phones by putting them in just like Ziploc baggies. Highly recommend doing something like that. I actually put the Ziploc baggies in my drop bag at Forest Hill, and I told my crew to like put those baggies in my pack so that when I picked it up there, I had it for the river crossing ready. You got to think of small things like that just in your planning process. The river crossing I was a bit intimidated because your body spends all day, like 78 miles of your day at that point, trying to cool you off and because it's so hot out. And then when you step into like a cold river, or at least what I was expecting was when you step into a cold river, now your body has to warm you up from a really cold river. So I was a bit like intimidated by a river crossing super late in the race because, a lot of ultra runners, including myself, get the chills when you do something like that. So but it actually worked out pretty well. I didn't really have any issues with that. The water was fairly warm, I think, because the water temperature at night is probably pretty hot because of just, it bakes in the sun all day. I don't know if this is true, but when I was in LA, somebody told me that the Pacific Ocean is actually warmer at night because it heats up during the day, and then at night it cools off. So then during the next day, it's colder. I thought maybe the river was like the same thing. I don't know if that's true. Just anyways, it was a lot warmer of a river than I expected, but it did go up to my chest at one point. And like the tricky thing about the river crossing is like when you do it at night, there's like one thing that's really cool is you have all these volunteers who are standing in the river and they guide you across. And there's also these green glow up sticks in the river, and they try to put those glow up sticks in like the spots where you should step. But there's some fairly big rocks. Maybe rocks isn't the right term. Boulders. There's boulders in the river, and you're kind of like working your way, like holding onto the rope across the river crossing. And like you're just trying to not. I felt like I was just trying to not hurt myself by like slipping and sliding because some of those rocks you're stepping on are slippery. Meanwhile, you're like stepping awkwardly over these boulders, trying not to like strain anything. Meanwhile, you're super sore from 78 miles of running. But it was a cool experience. I thought that it was fun. And then in the moment, I probably would have told you it was a little stressful because I was like worried about getting the chills and, not hurting myself. But in retrospect, it was a really cool experience. Yeah. And then after the river crossing, me and Joel, we shared a drop bag. You can do that with your pacer. We both had shoes in a drop bag on the other side of the river. So on the other side of the river, there's like that second aid station I was talking about. We both were able to sit down, change shoes and socks. And I actually put my Ultraspire waist belt 600 lumen light in that bag as well. So that's when I was able to pick up my waist belt, which I really like those waist belts when you're trying to like, especially run fast through a night section. That was super useful for the like that last 22 miles of the race. So the river crossing, there's some good pictures. They're in my YouTube video as well. My mom actually captured like basically the whole river crossing on like her phone. She filmed everything vertically though, so I should have told her YouTube style is horizontal, Mom. I'll make sure she knows for next time. Alrighty, so anyways, after you finish the river crossing, you've got like 2 miles up to Green Gate at mile 79.8. Most of us are going to be hiking that. It's pretty hard to run at that point in the race. And, they went fairly quickly. Me and Joel were chatting about the river crossing and what the experience was like compared to what we had maybe seen on like YouTube and, just our free time in the past. We had equated the river crossing to being baptized in the same water that Killian and Jim and David Roach had run through and stuff like that. I guess David didn't technically run through it, but anyways, being baptized in the same water as Killian was funny. That's what we called the river crossing. We called it our version of being baptized. Yeah. All right. So let's see. I got up to Green Gate, and what do you know? The gate there's actually a green gate there. It is green. We got there at 10:54 p.m. And yeah, I don't know. It's just good got some food there. Typical Coke, ramen, and just did that at every aid station going forward. It was nice to be able to get something a little like starchier and like heavy in my stomach. And like something that is not just like simple sugars like I was consuming all day in me. That just felt really good. It also probably warmed me up a little bit after like the river crossing too. But yeah, let's see. So the rest of the race after Green Gate is very different from like any other parts of the course. It's all just like rolling hills. And, with my Ultraspire waist belt, I like personally, I know that a pacer, a lot of people, most of us probably have them like run in front of us. I prefer running in front of my pacer and being able to like see the whole trail. But yeah, most of the race after like Green Gate is just like rolling hills. Yeah, I mean, it all kind of just like blends in together if I'm being completely honest. Yeah, let's see. I think I was going like I was averaging like 15-minute miles. We were hitting like 13-14s and like the trail. We basically were just like running everything that was flat or downhill. And then we did run a little bit of uphills, but anything that looked like it was prolonged or somewhat steep, we were just like hiking. Yeah, basically, I mean, as anybody really defines uphill like late in the race. Anything that's like remotely uphill is up and you hike it. But yeah, in retrospect, we were hiking like smart and strong, but I do feel like I could have pushed a little bit harder. If there's 2 points in the race where I felt like I could have pushed harder, it was like miles 31 to 43 I already talked about, and then again, probably from mile like 80 to like 90. I think that we still felt like we were close to like that 24-hour finish, and we wanted to make sure that like I wasn't gonna like totally bonk out at the end. But I mean, we were probably moving at like 80% of my overall capabilities, which I feel like is, in a 100-mile race, like to only have GI issues for like the 2 miles I did, to think that maybe I could run 1 minute faster in some downhills like at mile 30 to 43, and to think that maybe I could save another 5 minutes from mile 80 to 90. I feel like, it was my first time running Western States. I'd never even been on the course before. I feel like we hit pretty close to my potential. But yeah, so, my memory of like running basically from Green Gate to Auburn Lakes Trailhead there, and then to like the Quarry Road aid station at mile 90, it all kind of blended together. It's just like rolling. I don't really think there's much to like note for anyone else other than that, like who's training for this. If you're like winning this, you're doing it during the day, and it's probably still pretty dang hot. But on a normal day, like those 10 miles are gonna be super easy to like fly through for probably like most people, especially if you're like a strong 24-hour runner. Yeah. The other thing that was interesting though on that section was like I felt like we were getting passed so frequently. I guess that's just like a testament to the caliber of athlete at Western States, but it felt like we were getting passed frequently, and then every time we passed like an aid station like Auburn Lakes or Quarry Road, we were just like super quick and efficient at aid stations because my fueling plan was pretty simple for the day, and I was just going with the same two things, ramen and Coke at the end, I was really surprised at just my finish time. I don't think I moved any places from, let's see, yeah, from Rucky Chucky. I was in 72nd place, and I finished in 71st. I think I was finishing, was it 71st? Yeah, no, I finished in 72nd. Sorry. So yeah, from Rucky Chucky to the finish, I finished in the same place, but it felt like I was just getting past. So I guess that just goes to show you like how important it is to be like efficient with your time at the aid stations. Because it doesn't really matter how fast if you, I would rather like, run at like a decent pace and be super fast at like the aid stations than have to like sprint to make up that time I'm losing at the aid station. But yeah, when we arrived at mile 90, Quarry Road aid station, there was a nice surprise there because the first person I saw when I got there was Hal Kerner, who I was just like shocked to see him. He's got like a great beard these days, great like gray beard. What was their aid station themed? It was like 90s New York or something. Super cool. Very awesome to meet him. I asked for a photo, and my pacer Joel was like, Stefan, you can't get a photo with him unless you like he had given me like broth and ramen. So I like chugged that, and I got my picture with him. At that point, we kind of knew we were going sub 24, so I was very willing to stop for a photo with people I have idolized for a long time. Because the first one we saw was Hal Kerner, and then we saw Jim Walmsley and Scott Jurek. They were all volunteering at the same aid station there, which was really freaking cool. When I saw Jim, I told him I really loved the documentary Found on 49, and he kind of cringed at that. For those of you who don't know, Found on 49 is like the documentary of Jim's first Western States, which was in, I think it was 2016, and he, in that race, made a wrong turn at mile like 90, was it like 91, or I think it was 91, up to Quarry Road. He like missed the turn. There's like a sharp left turn you have to make, and he missed it, and then he ended up finishing in like 20th place when he was like about to win the race and set the course record that year. So he didn't really, I don't think he loved hearing that, but I like genuinely had watched that documentary many times leading up to Western because I found his story inspiring and a lot of the things he said in there. I think the thing I found most inspiring was like he said that if you have to believe in yourself more than anyone else when you're like going to do something big, believe in yourself because nobody's going to believe in you more. And I thought that was a really great takeaway. But I also told him I thought it was awesome that he moved to France to train for UTMB, and he was like, well, that's not the only reason. Yeah, I'm sure the baguettes and the wine and the cheese have something to do with that. Anyways, this is going to be my longest episode by far. I just have a lot to say about Western States. Much love for this race. So seeing Scott was pretty cool. We got a picture with him too. Scott was funny. He was like, don't miss that famous turn in like a mile. It's on the left. I couldn't believe he said that to me. I thought it was pretty funny. And then, yeah, you leave that Quarry Road aid station and you go to, did I say what time it took me to get into there? I should. I should continue the theme. At Quarry Road, I was there in 20 hours, 43 minutes. Yeah. Alrighty. So what is that? 20 hours is like 3 in the morning or something? 43. That would be 7. That'd be like 1:43 in the morning. Yeah. That's about right. Anyways, yeah, it was really cool meeting all those guys there. Awesome to get a photo with a lot of the people I've idolized since I was in like high school. I have been watching and paying attention to ultra running since I was like 14 years old. So, back then Hal was still competitive and, in that time Jim eventually kind of took over the reins. Scott has always been a staple. So, yeah, super cool to meet all of them. They have all really inspired me throughout the years for different reasons. But yeah, leaving Quarry Road, the first mile out of there wasn't too bad, and then you have a fairly steep, like mile and a half climb or something up to the actual road. That was a little bit surprising. I didn't really think there was going to be anything else that was like as prolonged as a hike as that was. So just something to note for anyone who's prepping for that section. But yeah, I mean, really like the theme of the trail being like rolling up to mile 90 is true, but then it is mostly like uphill from mile 90 to, what is that? I'm trying to remember. Let's go to the bottom. So from Quarry Road to Pointed Rocks. Pointed Rocks is that aid station at mile 94.3. So that like 4 miles from, or 3.5 from mile 90.7 and 94.3. There's a good chunk of like uphill there because then you finish that climb, and then you like are on this trail and it brings you to the actual, it's a road crossing that you do, and you do cross the road and then you start like hiking uphill again, after you cross the road up to like Pointed Rocks there. So that was just kind of like hard and a little bit slow, but my pace was good. We got up to mile 94.3 at Pointed Rocks at 2:48 in the morning, so that was 21 hours 48 minutes into the race, and we averaged like 18 minutes. That goes to show you. We were averaging like from the Rucky Truckee crossing, or from Green Gate. My time was like skewed if I'm looking at my stats because we stopped to change my shoes after the river. But from Auburn Lakes Trailheads, I was averaging like 15-minute pace to the finish, except for from 90.7 and 94.3, we averaged 18-minute miles because of all the uphill that was in there. Just something to note that little section does take a little bit longer. Joel and I were pretty quick through Pointed Rocks. I think that Joel actually started bonking because I was so quick at the aid stations, and his job as pacer was to like make sure that I was getting everything I needed. So yeah, that was a another quick transition. I think I had to like change the battery in my Ultraspire after like right as we walked out of that aid station, and that was like it's like, I don't know why, I just like remember doing that, and I was able to change that, and then finally after that, like you've got a good chunk of like downhill running, but it's still like fairly rocky and like technical in a few spots, and as like you make your way to the what's it called? No Hands Bridge. I was blanking on the name of the bridge. No Hands Bridge that's over there. So yeah, you got a lot of downhill. It's a little bit technical. Just be smart on, stuff like that. Am I like 95 in a race, right? But the bridge was really inspiring to run across. It was very cool to see all the flags on the bridge, blowing in the wind at night. It's just like really cool. I was able to run. At that point, that's really where like the adrenaline started to kick in, and I was really starting to be, you could feel the finish at your fingertips. It was a very cool moment as we're running across the bridge, and Joel got a nice video that's in the YouTube video too of us, of me mostly like running across, because he was running behind me, he was filming me running with all the flags there. Super inspiring moment. But then you do have like one last kick in the nuts, one last climb up to the last aid station there at mile what mile is it, like 98 or 99? Yeah, Roby Point is at mile 98.9. And so it took us just over an hour to get to Roby Point from Pointed Rocks. I got there at 3:59 in the morning, so 22 hours 59 minutes into the race. And it's kind of crazy because like when you're on the bridge, you can look up and you can see where you have to actually get up to, because you can actually see like and hear cars on like a road above the bridge. like in the distance. So you kind of have an idea of like how many feet you have to climb up. It goes by quickly. Once you cross the bridge, you have like maybe a mile or so of like a easy but uphill grade, and Joel and I ran most of that, and then that turns into like a steep climb that goes on for maybe another mile or two, and then that's when you hit the Roby Point aid station. But at that point, you're just like hiking as fast as you can because you know that you got the finish at your fingertips. Once we were like getting close to Roby Point, there was like some cool hoka lights that they had set up. You could tell you're getting close, and then we didn't even like go into the aid station. They were like, "We're stoked to see you," and we were like, "We are too, but we're just gonna like finish this up. What's the point of stopping when you got 1 mile to go?" And it's not like it was in the middle of the night. It's not like we were low on water or anything. Yeah, and then the last part of the race is just like uphill. You're on concrete through the town of Auburn, and I don't think I didn't really look around a lot, but my crew and my parents who like drove around Auburn more like before, like when they were like, yeah, just after the race in general, they were paying attention to the area more. Apparently, it's a really nice town, but at night I was just like super focused on like following the chalk signs telling me where to go. And there's like it was really cool to see all the signs that they had set up. There were a few hardcore ultra running fans just in lawn chairs outside, clapping and cheering you in. And then you make the famous left-hand turn into the track, and I'll never forget it. It was really cool. I dreamed of that for 16 years, having learned of Western States when I was 14, ultramarathon man. So it was really amazing experience to actually be there. I remember Joel he was like, "Look around, man. You've been waiting for this." And, there was somebody on the live stream who was, that motherfucker was taking up lane 1. I wanted to run in lane 1, but he was trying to film me run around the track as I was finishing up. I thought it was funny though that I didn't have lane 1 to run the shortest distance into the finish. Yeah, but anyways, he was filming me, and I was really happy. And my dad was there clapping, and then he like ran to the other side of the track to see me finish. And then I hit like the far side of the track with 200 meters to go, and I looked at my pacer Joel, and I was like, "All right, it's go time. Like this is the part of the track where like my races in high school, I was thinking to myself, I always start." So I was like, "This is like a good point to really put that final kick into gear," and just like sprinted it in. And it was a very joyous, awesome moment that I'll remember forever, finishing my first Western States. And that's why this podcast is almost 2 hours long. It's because I'm super passionate about this race. It's not just like the event. To me, the reason I'm so passionate about this, about Western States in particular, is because of the journey it took to get there. The 16 years of dreaming, of growing from like a runner in high school who was running 5Ks and mile races to marathons in college, to my first ultra marathons as a young professional, having finished a Moab 240 along the way, along with 12 other 100-mile races, and just all the memories and the friends that I've made along the way. That to me is really why Western States is such a special event. It's because of the journey that it takes to get there. I know that people get in with 1 or 2 tickets, and that's really amazing and lucky, but I think that it should be reserved for, not reserved, but that's a bad way to put it. It should be an event that is a journey to get to, because that's really what makes a finish there so special, is all I'm trying to say. And yeah, it was awesome. I'll never forget it. I love Western States. I love the race. I got the belt buckle here. I know this has been a long episode, so I'm going to finish it up by just showing this. Here's the belt buckle if you're watching on YouTube. Yeah, it's pretty sweet. I'll show the back in a second. So on the front it says 100 miles, 1 day, and Western States endurance run on the front. And then on the back, they actually, I don't know if you can really see it in the camera, but they engrave your name into the back, which is also super cool. So this is my prized possession now. Love this thing. Super cool. I joked all year I needed to get a silver belt buckle to wear to my friend's wedding, and because I didn't have anything to match bronze, and I got it. Mission accomplished. Yeah, I love Western States. It was an amazing experience. Just being able to put in the best training cycle of my life, running the best race of my life at the most important time. It was a really awesome experience that I will remember forever, and I thought it was really cool to have my parents there. It was the first time they were my crew and pacer. Big thank you to them. Big shout out to them. Big thank you and shout out to my pacer, Joe Gartenberg. I love you, man. It was tough out there. It was tense at times. I know he was trying his best to help me get the finish that I'd always dreamed of. And it felt like at times there was a lot of pressure on both of us trying to make sure that that dream became a reality. But we got it done. Mission accomplished. It was awesome. Alrighty, that's everything I got for this episode. I'll just finish it up with the usual. Thank you so much for taking your valuable time to listen. If you have any more questions for me about the Western States 100, or you're looking for a running coach or a nutrition coach from a registered dietitian, a running coach, an ultra runner like myself, you can reach out to me at journeyruncoaching.com. I would love to be your coach, and I would love to help you with whatever you're training for next. As always, with Journey Running, the goal is to help you run farther, feel smarter, and develop character through trail and ultra running. Thank you so much for listening. Once again, the website's journeyruncoaching.com. You can also email me directly at journeyrunningllc@gmail.com. And have a great rest of your day.